People always find time for what they really want to do, and that makes you a professional, being better every day.
Welcome to the second episode of Season 2 of the World of Work podcast of the WoW, and I am joined by the very first guest who's kicking off the season, and that's Gareth Worthington, or rather Dr. Gareth Worthington, because as you will get to know Gareth, he is a very polyhedric individual who's kind of like saying, why settle for only one profession? If you have multiple talents and multiple things that you want to be engaged in and pursue, then you should pursue them if that's what you want. And as he says, people will always find time to do what they want to do. So let's discover a little bit more about the amazing story of Gareth. Hey there, Gareth. Welcome. Welcome to the World of Work podcast. It's a pleasure to have you in Season 2. You're actually going to be kicking off this season, by the way. And what I'd love to cover with you is one of the paradigm shifts that I'm particularly fond of, which is really this possibility of pursuing multiple professions in a lifetime. Now, perhaps nowadays it's a little bit of a unique thing, but I do think in the future it will most probably be a normal thing to do, to start, kind of going about your career in different pursuing different paths. And your path is so extraordinary because not only it's multiple, but it's parallel too.
Yeah.
So it's not even like pivoting careers here. We're talking about multiple careers at the same time.
Juggling careers, yeah.
Exactly. So definitely fascinating to have you on board with on the show. I just want to close this like this we can see each other better. And before we start, I'd like to say a couple of words about you, and then we can kind of take it from there. So what I have here, and you're going to help me with this train of thought. So you are a trained marine biologist.
Yeah.
You have a PhD in comparative endocrinology.
Yeah.
Should I call you doctor, actually?
Technically, yes, but it's okay.
Okay, Dr. Gareth. For this interview, we're going to do Dr. Gareth. So, PhD in comparative endocrinology. You recently completed the EMBA.
Yeah.
Okay, at the Quantic School of Business and Technology, and then of course you've got multiple post grad certifications in pharmaceutical industry related disciplines. Now, you're currently in medical affairs.
Yeah.
Right. On new cancer therapies for the pharma industry.
Mm-hmm.
But you're also an award-winning author.
Yeah.
And I'm so delighted to have an award-winning author here on the show. And you're also a member of the Science Fiction Writers of America, the British Science Fiction Association, and the International Thriller Writers. Okay. And on top of that, because I do know quite a few people who are part of these associations, but what makes you particularly different is that all of your books are in development for TV and film.
Yeah, they are. Mm-hmm.
And of course, you are represented by an agent, right? I guess Renee Fountain and
Renee
Natalia
Fountain
Gandolfo.
and Natalia Gandolfo out of New York.
Out of New York. You have 2 new books that are coming out very soon. Condition Black, written together with your co-authors Stu Jones.
Yeah, Stu, yeah.
And A Time for Monsters, that's your second book. And you've last but not least here, I have written that you are the founding board member of the Zuvian Media Group Incorporated, which is a unique books to film corporation.
Yeah.
And let me add on top of that, you've lived in the US, in Portugal, in the Netherlands, Singapore, currently in Switzerland, where we met.
Yeah.
You have hand-tagged sharks. I don't know what that means, but I'll be happy to
Yeah, we'll get there.
that. And you're trained in various martial arts, including, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but here we go, Jeet
Kune Do. Yeah.
Jeet Kune Do, Muay Thai.
Muay Thai, yeah.
Muay Thai. And help me with the other MMA.
MMA, mixed martial arts.
Okay, mixed martial arts. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know this is not a live show, but if it were a live show, I would say, I'm blown away by all of this. So tell me your story. Tell me your story from your perspective, like from marine biologist,
Yeah.
PhD in endocrinology, a profession in the medical affairs field in the pharma where we met,
Yeah.
and at the same time all of these other
Yeah.
interests and passions and talents.
Yeah,
Gareth.
I mean, so I mean, life just kind of takes you on strange paths that you don't necessarily expect. So I started wanting to be a animal behaviorist. I grew up watching David Attenborough on TV, all the BBC wildlife shows, and I really wanted to be the guy with a camera out there filming animals and learning about their behavior. And that's what I grew up watching, and so that's why I studied marine biology in the first place.
Okay.
And then from there, I skipped my master's and went straight to PhD. And actually, my first PhD, I don't have two. The first PhD I started was in the breeding behavior of ghost knifefish. That was my original PhD. But my supervisor left me after 3 months and went back to Germany and said, hey, you can either come or, you got to find another PhD. And so I was in a bit of a quandary at that point. And there was a professor at the University of Manchester who had a spot open in his team. Okay. And his team were interesting and unique in that they used fish as a biological model to study endocrinology and other hormone systems in other animals and in humans. And so that's kind of where the transition happened. It went from a very kind of behavioral based PhD into a very lab based PhD. And I worked on the role of parathyroid hormone related protein in calcium homeostasis in this particular fish model. But PTHRP is also a big component of certain cancers. And so I had this strange PhD that kind of went between the two, really, and it had kind of wider implications beyond the fish biological model. And so I finished my PhD after 3 years. I was 24, 25. And then once you've been in the lab for that long, I just wanted to be anywhere but the lab. Really hated it. And so I got a job working for the NHS. I was a consultant in the NHS, and my job was to bring down waiting lists. So we were hiring South African doctors to come into the UK and, do mobile cataract units, that kind of thing. And then through some personal circumstances, someone close to me was passing away of cancer in the north. And so I went back north, and a friend of mine happened to be in medical writing, and he said, hey, you know what, I think this would be a good fit for you. You're good at writing and you get the science. And so I applied for a job at a medical writing agency and got the job. And so I spent 5 years in agency doing med writing stuff. And then I never know who it was, but someone put me forward for to be the global lead for metabolics at Danone in medical affairs and jumped to the pharma industry. And so I did that. I jumped to that. I was the lead medical affairs person for metabolics at Danone. And from there, it rolled. From there, I went to Amgen and worked in med affairs in Amgen, and then on to Singapore with GSK. And I've basically along the way, I've worked in almost every department in medical affairs you can think of, as well as commercial and competitive intelligence. I was the head of a competitive intelligence agency in Europe for a bit. So really spanned most of the pharma industry roles.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually that's exactly where we also met. And I do find the pharma is such a high churn anyway in terms of the industry per se. I mean, one day you're in one company, the next day you're into the next, but there is a continuity nonetheless in the type of career, right, and the type of things that you've been working on. So have you always been focused on the cancer area and therapies?
No. So I mean, in agency, I spent a lot of time in GI medicine. At the Danone, it's metabolic disorders. So it's very rare diseases in children. When a child's born, they give the heel prick test. They test a bit of blood. They're testing for very specific things, metabolic disorders. So if you've ever looked at a bottle of Coke, and it'll say on the bottle of Coke, contains a source of phenylalanine.
Okay.
Right? If you have looked at what it says that. The reason it says that is because certain children have a disease called PKU, where they cannot process phenylalanine. And if they do, they become neurologically deficient for life. It's irreversible. But if you remove that from their diet for life, then they're perfectly neurotypical. And so there are 100 or so of these diseases, these metabolic disorders, where they can't process certain amino acids or certain things. And so Danone was focused on creating foods and drinks for these children. And it sounds really basic, but it was my favorite job I ever did. So I worked in there. I worked in cardiovascular medicine for Pfizer. I did GI for Shire. Before I was at Shire the first time, I used to work with Shire.
Yes. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was a consultant for Shire.
It is a small world, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I've run the gambit in terms of like therapy areas as well.
And as you were, I don't know, have you ever thought, like, when you look into your career on that perspective, have you ever thought of it in a planning mode, or did things kind of just as well happen to you? I mean, when, a little bit, it sounds by serendipity, you were able to initially combine the medical with the writing, and then from there, you grew into these different fields and within the pharma, within different functions too.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if in terms of your thinking process towards it, was it in any way, let's go for it and let's see where it lands, or do you think, like, in the back of your head say, this actually makes sense for my
So I tend to I create opportunity, I think, is the way I think about it. So my PhD professor, he used to always call me a bucket scientist. So
okay, what does that mean?
That means that we were very lab focused. So I mean, my PhD, a big chunk of it was developing a radioimmunoassay, which is very lab based and sat on the bench. But when I wrote my thesis, my whole thesis was, who cares? Like, I know this tiny thing. What does it mean to the whole organism? What does it mean to this? And that tends to be how I've always thought. So when I go into a role in an organization, I'm like, great, this is my role. This is what I'm doing. But what does it mean to my department? What does it mean to this function? What does it mean to this company? And I always find myself sticking my nose in other people's business and trying to connect dots. And that ends up being the role that I make for myself. So the reason I've got so much diverse experience is because I make it so that I want to understand the bigger picture, the strategy behind something. So yeah, I think that's kind of how I work.
And that's super important because actually what you're saying, because quite a few people, when they reach out to me, they say, I feel like I don't fit into a box, or I feel like, if they're applying for a job, or, there's the classical job description, and us in HR, the beloved HR colleagues. But anyway, so we're very good in job descriptions and kind of saying, these are the qualifications, what's needed, etc. And quite a few people are kind of like, they don't necessarily fit into one given job description. What you're talking about is very much in line with that, which is not only kind of sticking to what that job actually is, what your role accountability is, but also looking across and saying, okay, well, how's that connected to other parts of the organization? But to step into an organization, what would you recommend, let's say, for those who are applying today? And it's a bit of a complicated market out there.
I guess, I mean, the job description is kind of like the baseline. You shouldn't be applying for it if you can't do that, right? And that's kind of how it is for every candidate that you're up against. That's the baseline. It's the kind of, we're expecting you to be able to do that. All of my questions to someone I interview are almost nothing to do with the job spec, because as if you can't do that, you shouldn't be here. I'll ask a few just to double check that they can do what they say they can do, and then beyond that, it's much more about the strategy and the company and the department and the co-workers and how they're going to fit, what else they bring to the table, for me. And so that's, people can say I don't fit in a box, and that's fine. But understand you have a job to do and you have to do that job. That's your baseline. And that's what you have to do. So do that well, and then that will earn you the respect to be able to do things outside of it. If you can't do your baseline well, then you're never going to get the respect to stick your nose in other people's business.
Very true. That's a little bit the ticket to ride, you know, that's a bit
Yeah,
the entry ticket.
right,
And
exactly.
and it's true, you do have to prove yourself at least in the first 100 days. And
Yeah,
in those 100 days, some folks tend to underestimate that a lot in terms like the first 100 days in the company,
yeah,
or in a new job within the same company, by the way, too.
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
It's not because you've already been in that organization for a long time that automatically when you're shifting from one job to the next, that automatically you'll be able to do that just as well as your previous role.
yeah.
So okay, and tell me, how does the writing fit into all of this? Tell me about this other side.
So I've been writing since I was a kid, and pharma, as you know, can be very restrictive, particularly in medical affairs. It's very has very rule driven about what you are and not allowed to do. So your creativity side is
Absolutely.
somewhat stymied, necessarily stymied, for what we do. And so I used to write on the side for myself, and I wrote a book, a series of short books, I guess in, oh geez, when was that? From 2009-ish, I started writing again. After all my education, I got back into writing. I self-published, and then someone said, hey, you know what, you should try and get an agent. This is good. And I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. I mean, it's quite hard to get an agent. But I targeted a couple of I thought would work well, and I think it was my second or third query letter. A lady, Renee Phantom, picked up the phone and was like, "Hey, let's have a conversation." And she tried. She took me on board. I signed with her, and we tried to sell my books. The ones I'd already written, I kind of expanded and tried to sell those. And honestly, that didn't go well. The publishing industry is very difficult. It's very hard to break a new author.
Absolutely.
And she was very honest with me, and she said, "Look, we've tried for a while, and I don't know that we're going to be able to do this." And I'm like, okay, well then we tried. And I think, and I love this about life. This is kind of how I live my life. I sent a tweet out about it, just like, hey, it's a shame this would make such a cool movie, something along those lines. And then a woman called Atalia, who knows Renee because it's her agency, but I'd never actually had anything to do with her, replied and kind of said, what have you got? And so I replied back to her, and we had a little to and fro. And she spoke to a producer friend of hers who works with like Hollywood and publishing agencies. And
Okay.
she said, let's get you connected. And the next thing I know, she's like, you know what? I'm setting up a company, a publishing company that specifically publishes books to sell to Hollywood. Would you be interested? I like your story. I think it would work. And I said, sure. So we did that, and we published my first book in 2017, Children of the Fifth Son, the first book. And from there, I got more and more involved with her. It was kind of early days. And I kept offering help, again, sticking my nose in. So I just kept saying, hey, you know what, you want help with that? You're kind of setting things up. You want some help with that? I can help with that. And she kept laughing and saying, be careful what you wish for. And in the end, I got fully involved, and she said, I'll give you a role, and she made me director of business development. And I'm essentially, so I bought into the company, I bought shares, helped fund it to get it started up. And I'm essentially, they laugh that she jokes that I'm kind of like the face that she flies around the world. So whenever someone needs to be face to face, she sends me. So I go to New York, book festival. I go to the book expo. I go to see some of the Publisher Weekly guys, who are the big trade magazine. I go to meet them face to face, and that's kind of my job. I vet the manuscripts. I help with the marketing,
And you write at the same time. So
at the
it's
same
like,
time.
how do you do all of this? How many of you are there out there? I mean, Dr. Gareth, tell me, I think in those labs, you've probably been cloning yourself or something like that. What's your secret? Really?
Honestly, people, it's always about sacrifice. It's about what you want to do.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah.
everybody has exactly the same amount of time in the day.
Very correct.
So it's about how you use it, what you choose to do with it. I'm a very restless person. If 2 hours have gone by and I'm not doing something that I feel is worthwhile, then I'm kind of like, what am I doing? I'm not a sleeper particularly.
So what does that mean? How many
I
hours?
don't sleep. I function on sort of fewer hours of sleep. I go to bed late. I had
Like
a
5 hours, 4 hours? Some people
4
say
5
that's, oh my
generally.
gosh,
I get
okay.
and I don't sleep heavily either. It depends on, I've got small kids, it depends on the day. But,
True.
the other day I got something through an email through at 1 o'clock in the morning, which was a proof for my newest book. So I get up and I go to the computer and I sort it
And you,
out and I order the new one, because I would rather, I'm very conscious that one day I'm going to die. I get 80 years if I'm lucky, and that's
yeah,
it. That's all the time I get. So I can waste it, or I can try and cram it with as much things and look back and say that was a good life. I did
yeah,
something.
yeah.
Um, you know.
It's very interesting you talk about this concept of time because I think that's exactly what started kicking in for me too. And the sense of there's an end.
Yeah,
There's an end to this. And it's like, so how I'm spending my time is becoming one of the key decision makers for me in terms of what I choose to do or not.
yeah,
But and that's what I admire about you is how nonetheless you've been able to pursue these things in parallel. Like I decided to move on to something else.
yeah,
Like this, I can fully focus on other things, on diversity and we were talking about a little bit the pharma. It's great at the same time. It's not only the pharma. A lot of businesses, unless you're in the creative business space, which is a different one,
yeah,
they're it's there's only so much that you can actually create and do and put out there in the world in terms of sharing your knowledge, your story, your
yeah.
music, or your books. So that's what I find really, this concept of I'm still amazed
It's
on
about leaving
how you
some.
pack that all in and what is left out, I guess, because that's also to your point, the sacrifices must be pretty
Yeah.
impressive.
So I mean, I guess a couple of things. I'm not massively social, so I don't go to bars. I don't go to restaurants. I have my kind of group of friends, and I'll see
Yeah.
them, and not now because of COVID, but generally we'd see each other every couple of months for a dinner, and that's kind of enough. And then otherwise, I fill my time with my family and my things I like to do. Um, but I can't sit still. So a downside to it, and there is a downside to it, is that I never stand still. I almost don't take any time to enjoy what I'm doing because I'm always on to the next thing. I'm always like, okay, that's done, great, let's keep going. You know, um, so there is that aspect to it. Um, so, but for me, it's the journey, not the destination. I like doing it. I mean, when I finished my PhD, I didn't even go to a ceremony. I'm like, great, done, let's keep going. That was a stepping stone to where I'm going.
Wow.
Um, so it's yeah, taking things kind of head on um,
And like, how do you plan it, if at all? Like your day, does that mean you need to have a very planned agenda, calendar to be able to fit all this in? I mean, some folks to be able to juggle multiple things, family, work, and women, by the way, are pretty good at that because they need to juggle lots of things at the same time. And they're very organized in doing that. I'm wondering if that's also your strategy on coping
yeah.
with
I,
this all the to-dos,
To an extent, yeah. So I have obviously my work calendar. So my primary job is my primary job, and that has to take precedence over everything else. But then I've got a block of time. So what do I do with it? So right now you can see like I have my weights bench in the back. So if I have half an hour between calls and I have time, let's do some workout, let's do some weights, then go back on my call. And then and then
Okay.
I'll go to play with my kids and have dinner, and then I'll come back. Okay, let's do some writing. If I'm not feeling particularly creative in terms of writing, because you can't always just sit down and say, now I'm going to write. Then
Absolutely.
I'll switch it and I'll do my book covers and I'll do something different creative, which doesn't require the same mental space. But I still feel the time, you know.
Okay, so it's really you pack up your day like there's no tomorrow.
The MBA I did, and I love this company. So they're called Quantic, and the entire MBA is done with your cell phone. Um, they're
Wow.
using disruptive technology, and you do 6 minute chunks, and you can do as many as you like. But you can do it at the bus stop. You can do it when you're waiting for something, and that just fits my ethos so well. So I still had to pass all the exams. I still had to do my coursework, etc. But the actual learning portion of it was done on the fly when I had time. So it was great. I could just do it in between things.
Right,
It's just,
right.
but you have to be able to
in-between
switch
space.
very quickly.
Yes, yes. And for those who may not have this natural talent of like switching very quickly,
Yeah.
is there a recommendation you would give or advice you would give? Because I do sense the world is going anyway in that direction. This ability to switch quickly. It's beyond multitasking, I think, now what we're talking about, because you were talking about mental states.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in that. I mean, there's a moment of a creative mental state, there's a moment of an execution one, there's a moment, and really they're very different states of being, literally.
Yeah, they are.
So being able to switch these states, I think, is really the interesting challenge for the future.
Yeah, I think for some people they plan. So, for instance, my co-author Stu that you mentioned, Stu is a SWAT sniper out of Alabama. That's his day job. He's out there catching bad guys and he's doing crazy stuff. I mean, that guy's the all-American hero. But what he does, he gets up at 6 or 5 and he'll go, right, I have got 30 minutes to knock out some writing, and I will do that every single day. And if you do that every single day, eventually you got a book. Even if you write 100 words,
True.
You do that every day, you got a book. And that's how he works. And he just carves out that time. He makes sure he has he does that. So that works for him.
Right. Each one's basically got there is not a one strategy.
You have to want it. I think that's the thing for me. You have to want it.
Yeah.
Everyone says, I want to write a book, or I've thought about doing this, or I've thought about doing that. And it's kind of like, well, tomorrow never comes. So do it.
What's stopping you now? Yeah.
People always find time for what they really want to do.
True.
That's what I say, really. It's and that maybe what you want to do is spend time with friends. Maybe what you want to do is relax and de-stress and watch TV for an hour, and that's totally fine. It's whatever makes you happy. But you will find that time to do what you want to do. So I really want to write books. I really want to run my the company with Italia. I want to do whatever else.
Well, here we are. This is the end of part 1 of this very special episode with Gareth Worthington. Do stay tuned for the upcoming part 2 on the World of Work podcast on the WoW. We continue the conversation along this train of thought. Till the next time, as always, stay safe and do take good care.